Hey guys, tonight you find yourself beneath the outer wall of a noble household, where dawn has not yet broken, and the whole world seems made of cold stone, damp straw, and the smell of old smoke caught high in the rafters. Your boots are already rimmed with mud, your fingers already stiff, and somewhere beyond the gate a horse breathes white clouds into the winter dark like a small chimney with opinions. A bell sounds far off through the mist, slow and hollow, as if the morning itself is reluctant to begin. Torchlight flutters along wet mortar. River fog clings low across the yard. The straw underfoot is half rotten, half frozen, and entirely unconcerned with your comfort. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You probably would not last a week out here, if only because every useful object appears to be either freezing, smoking, splintering, or all three at once. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, comment your location and local time, so I can imagine where in the wide night you are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand for a moment with the collar of your rough wool tunic turned up, looking at the keep as it rises above you in layers of dark stone and narrow windows, its towers holding the last of the night, as if daylight must ask permission before entering. The noble household still sleeps in part, though not entirely. A place like this never truly rests. Somewhere a watchman coughs. Somewhere a dog gives one doubtful bark and decides against further involvement. Somewhere, behind oak doors thick with iron straps, the kitchen fire has been banked low through the night and waits for hands clever enough, or merely desperate enough, to wake it. Those hands are yours. You duck beneath the side entry used by servants rather than lords, because medieval society is very firm on the matter of which doorway belongs to whom. The passage is narrow and smells of wet wool, onions and old ashes. Rushes lie scattered over stone underfoot, meant to soften the cold and soak up whatever human life spills upon them. They have done their best. They now carry the faint scent of ale, soot, and yesterday's boots. Some castles change the rushes often, some do not. No one can quite agree whether the herbs sometimes mixed into them are meant to sweeten the air or merely convince people that effort has been made. Inside, the dark is warmer, but only in the way a cave may be warmer than a field. You move by memory and ember glow, one palm sliding along a wall slick with old chill. The kitchen opens gradually out of shadow-long tables, hooks, barrels, baskets, a chopping block scarred by years of honest violence against turnips, and, at the far side, the hearth broad, black, silent for now, like a sleeping beast with a bad temper. Above it hangs the soot-thick hood, and above that the rafters disappear into smoke darkness where no broom has ever truly triumphed. A boy's already here, curled near the warmest stones with a blanket over his shoulders and his nose tucked down like a hedgehog. He blinks at you with the tragic expression of someone too young to be working and too accustomed to complaint to expect rescue. He is called Toma, or Tom, or something close enough that nobody troubles to settle it the same way twice. He rises when he sees you, rubbing his hands. "You're late," he mutters. You're not late. He says it because misery enjoys company, and because the first words in a kitchen are rarely affectionate. Still, his voice is quiet, as if afraid to wake the room itself. You kneel before the hearth and rake aside the ash with an iron rod. Beneath the grey lies a dim red pulse. Good. The fire has held. You feed it twists of straw first, then scraps of brushwood, then chips of dry oak from the wood stack kept under cover for this purpose. Dry is a generous term. Everything in this century is damp around the edges, yet the ember accepts your offering with a faint crackle, then another, and soon a shy flame licks up between the blackened brands. This is how the day begins for a medieval cook in a noble household, not with triumph, not with a silver platter, with ash on your hands and smoke in your eyes and the knowledge that if the fire fails, everything after it fails too. Bread, pottage, broth, sauces, roasting, boiling, heating water for washing trenches, warming stones for chilled feet. All of it depends on persuading wood to burn in a building half convinced it would rather be a fortress than a home. Toma fetches more kindling. You set him to blowing gently through a hollow reed toward the base of the flames. He does so with the solemnity of a priest performing a rite. Some swear a fire catches better if the first breath upon it comes from a child, or a widow, or anyone born during a storm. Others say the only thing fire respects is dry fuel and stubbornness. In this kitchen, both schools of thought are entertained, mostly because no one dares offend luck before sunrise. As the flames strengthen, the room begins to reveal itself. A row of iron pots hangs along the wall, black with use. Bundles of herbs, long dried, droop from pegs overhead sage. Thyme, perhaps a little rosemary if the steward has not counted it too carefully. There are sacks of oats, a tub of coarse salt, onions strung together like patient old men, and a basket with 2 cabbages that already look morally exhausted. A side table holds yesterday's trencher's stale slabs of bread that served as plates in the hall, and will now, depending on rank and fortune, be eaten by servants, given to the poor, or fed to dogs with higher standards than most peasants. You cross to the water barrels and lift the lid. Low already. Of course, water never appears where it is needed unless someone has carried it there, and the carrying of it generally falls to whichever back is nearest. Soon you will have to go out to the yard pump or the cistern, and later, perhaps down toward the river if the household is large and the day long. A cook in such a place does not merely cook. You haul, scrub, lift, stir, fetch, salt, chop, strain, and keep half a household from realizing how much labor stands between them and a warm meal. The first true sound of the waking castle comes then another bell, closer this time, from the chapel or perhaps the small priory nearby beyond the walls. It marks the hour before full dawn, and with it the household begins to turn in its sleep. You hear footsteps overhead, muted but many. A maid crosses some corridor. A door opens and shuts. A groom curses softly in the yard. Geese add their commentary with the usual talent for making alarms sound like resentment. You warm your hands briefly above the rekindled hearth, then set the first pot in place. This will be for pottage, because pottage is the quiet, undeniable backbone of life. Oats, barley, peas if there are peas, scraps of leek, maybe cabbage, maybe onion, maybe last night's broth thinned and coaxed into a second usefulness. Rich or poor, nearly everyone is only a few ingredients away from another pot of something soft and steaming. It is not glamorous, it is dependable, medieval cuisine. At its most practical is an endless argument with hunger conducted one ladle at a time. At the far end of the kitchen, the chief cook has not yet arrived, but his authority is already present, lingering like old pepper. His knives are wrapped in cloth on the shelf no one else touches. His mortar sits near the spice box, that precious little chest containing ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and pepper worth enough to make a man count each pinch like coin. In noble households, food must do more than fill the belly. It must display wealth, order, hospitality, and command over distant lands the diners themselves will never see. A lord may boast with banners and horses, but his kitchen boasts daily in saffron threads and imported spice. Still, before the noble table comes the practical table. Before the pastries and roasted game and shining sauces, there must be breakfast for the workers who keep the whole stone body alive. Stable hands, scullions, porters, washerwomen, the old woman who skims fat and knows every rumour before it is spoken, the one-eyed turnspit dog asleep by the wall, who will spend half the day trotting inside a wheel to turn roasting meat, and the other half pretending his life choices were made freely. He opens one eye now and regards you in silence. You and me both, you tell him. The dog closes the eye again, refusing to be drawn into intimacy before dawn. By the time pale light begins to seep around the shutter edges, the hearth is properly awake. Smoke threads upward. Water warms. The first smell of an onion hits the air as you split and peel and chop with a knife that could stand sharpening but must serve. Your fingers smart from cold. Your nose runs a little from the smoke. Your stomach reminds you that cooks often begin work before they begin eating, which is one of the more impolite customs of the age. More servants drift in, wrapped in cloaks, hair uncombed, faces creased by sleep and duty. One woman carries a basket of eggs tucked in straw. Another brings yesterday's coarse bread. A man shoulders in with split wood and stamps the mud off his boots, though not enough of it. There are nods, grunts, one brief argument over a ladle, then the comfortable rhythm of shared necessity. Nobody here needs the day explained to them. They can smell it starting. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the kitchen rules the household or serves it. Everything begins here, in heat and smoke and chopped roots, under rafters dark as crows' wings. The noble family may wake to fur-lined coverlets, beeswax candles, and embroidered hangings, but they will rise into a day already prepared by hands reddened at the knuckles and roughened by ash. You feel that truth settle in you as surely as the warmth from the hearth. Outside, the sky moves from black to blue-grey. Inside, the castle's stomach begins to stir. And you, with smoke caught in your hair and onion on your hands, begin to feed it. By the time the first true light reaches the yard outside, the kitchen is no longer a chamber of shadows and embers, but a place fully claimed by work. The hearth has taken on a steady roar. The iron pot of pottage trembles gently as it begins to thicken. Steam beads along the rim and vanishes into the smoky air. Every surface feels damp in one way and overheated in another, which is the medieval kitchen's preferred compromise. You barely have time to notice it, because water is needed. Wood is needed, and the ovens, those great blunt mouths of brick and clay, must be coaxed awake before the household can think of bread, pastry, or anything finer than a spoonful of oats. So you begin with the least romantic labour, which is to say the most essential. A pair of yokes leans by the door, polished smooth where generations of shoulders have argued with them. You lift one, settle it across your back, and hook 2 empty buckets beneath it. The wood presses hard against your collarbone through the wool. Toma, still half asleep but no longer bold enough to comment on lateness, takes the smaller pails and follows you into the yard. The cold there cuts cleanly after the kitchen smoke. Your eyes water. Frost still clings to the wheel ruts. Above the stables, dawn is washing the sky into a weak pearl colour, and the towers of the keep stand blunt and patient, as though they have seen 1,000 mornings exactly like this and remain unimpressed. At the pump 2 washerwomen are already ahead of you, speaking in low voices about a maid who has taken ill, or perhaps only claimed to, depending on which version of the tale you trust. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, especially before breakfast. You wait your turn, shifting your weight from one chilled foot to the other, listening to the clank and sigh of the handle. Water comes reluctantly, iron cold, splashing into the buckets with a force that numbs your fingers at once. It is impossible not to think, each time, that every pot, every pan, every hand, every trencher and every greasy table will demand more of this before midday. You shoulder the yoke again. The buckets swing and pull, each step turning your spine into a practical sermon about labour. This is what many grand meals are made of long before spice, or roasting a wet path between pump and door, the weight of water, the ache in the neck, the certainty that no noble in fur ever thinks about how soup first enters the room. Medieval households are full of invisible miracles. Most of them are just chores performed repeatedly. Back inside, you pour the first water into the heating cauldrons and send Toma back for more. Then you turn to the wood. The stack under the eaves has dwindled since last night, and what remains must be sorted smaller kindling for a quick catch, thicker splits for steady heat, the hard oak billets for ovens that need to keep their temper. Fire in a noble kitchen is not one thing but several, each with its own appetite. The hearth wants a constant feeding for pots and spit. The bake oven wants a fierce blaze first, so the bricks can swallow heat and hold it. The small side brazier, meant for warming sauces or setting dough near a gentler warmth, wants patience more than force. A good cook learns flame the way a shepherd learns weather. You kneel before the bake oven and begin laying the fuel inside. Its mouth is low and wide, blackened within, still sour with yesterday's smoke. The first spark catches slowly. You bend to it, blowing until your cheeks ache, then add more twigs, then another handful, then a split branch. The flames lick upward at last, bright and mean. Your face grows hot while your back stays cold. It is a common experience in this century, one side roasting, the other still negotiating with winter. An old kitchen woman named Alice comes by with her apron already smeared in flour. She glances at the oven and grunts approval, which from her amounts to praise nearly poetic in its warmth. Alice has worked here longer than anyone can say with certainty. Some swear she came as a bride from a nearby manor 30 years ago. Some swear she was born in the brewer's loft and simply grew into the kitchen like a useful herb. Even now, it is hard to tell whether she knows every recipe in Christendom or merely pretends to until people lose courage and obey her. "More ash scrape from the side," she says, pointing with her chin. "And mind the back bricks. Too hot and you'll blacken the first loaves." You do as told. In a kitchen, authority is often measured less by title than by who can prevent disaster with a glance. The chief cook may command the grander work, but people like Alice know where the day actually breaks apart. Soon the kitchen fills with the proper music of labour wood knocked into place. Lids rattling, knives hitting board, the hiss of damp fuel meeting flame. A servant from the buttery comes through bearing stale ale for the lower tables. Another passes with the sack of coarse flour. Someone laughs once, sharply, then remembers the hour and turns it into a cough. The one-eyed turnspit dog has been harnessed to his wheel, and now trudges with resigned dignity, setting the first small joint to rotate before the hearth. He does not look at anyone. It is the expression of a creature who has accepted that life is repetitive and that protesting it changes very little. You fetch more water, or you split more wood with a short-handled axe by the back step, feeling each strike run up through your wrist and elbow. Splinters lodge in your palm. Your breath smokes in front of you. Somewhere overhead, shutters are opening. The noble household is waking in earnest now. A horn sounds once from the outer gate. Hooves clatter over cobbles. Chapel bells drift in again from beyond the wall, marking the morning office. In places like this, bells divide the day as surely as knives divide onions. Even those who cannot read time by sun or shadow know life by sound. Bell for prayer, bell for gate, bell for meal, bell for warning, bell for death. You learn to live between them. Back at the oven, Alice has begun mixing dough in a broad trough, her arms white to the elbow with flour. You tip in warm water, then more, and she works it with salt and leaven saved from yesterday's batch. Nothing is wasted if it can be used again, and bread especially lives on memory. A little of the old gives life to the new. Some people claim the bread rises better if a cross is marked on the dough before covering it with cloth. Some say a whispered prayer to St. Honoratus helps. Others say the saints have better things to do than concern themselves with kitchen timing. Yet many a cook mutters something holy all the same, because if the loaves fail, holiness suddenly seems worth a try. The dough is left near the warmth, under linen, while the oven grows fiercer. You rake coals, test heat with the flat of your hand near the mouth, then pull back quickly before singeing the hair from your knuckles. There is no neat measure for this, no dial, no gauge, no tidy certainty. You learn from colour, from smell, from the breath of heat on skin, from the way ash pales on the bricks. A kitchen in this age is full of senses doing the work that instruments will one day inherit. The first breakfast servings go out in wooden bowls, pottage thick and plain, bread rough and dark, a little ale because water is not always as trustworthy as it looks. The lower servants eat quickly when they can, standing or perched on stools, warming hands over steam. You snatch your own mouthful between tasks, barely tasting it beyond salt and onion and hunger. Still, it lands in you like mercy. Then the dough is ready. You dust the peel with flour, shape the loaves by hand, and pass them one after another into the oven's deep heat. Each disappears into the dark with a little thump. You seal the mouth part way and step back. For a moment, there's nothing to do but wait, and waiting in a kitchen is its own tense craft. Bread asks for attention without interference. You cannot hurry it with strength. You can only listen, watch, and trust what you know. Beside you, the kitchen continues to gather speed. More water sloshes in, more wood is stacked, fat begins to warm in a pan. A basket of leeks arrives muddy from the garden store. The day opens wider, and all of it rests on these first victories. Enough water carried, enough fuel split, enough fire persuaded into usefulness. By now your shoulders ache steadily, and smoke has found its place in your hair and clothes so completely that you suspect you could walk through a monastery and be mistaken for a minor incense event. Yet there is satisfaction here too, quiet and solid. The fires are alive, the ovens are hot, bread is baking. The household may never notice this beginning, but it is built upon it all the same. And as the warm smell of the first loaves slowly pushes back the scent of ash, the whole kitchen seems to breathe deeper, as though the castle itself has begun to believe in breakfast. The smell of baking bread reaches the yard before the sun properly does, and that is how morning begins to draw people toward the kitchen as surely as bells draw them toward prayer. By now, the pale light over the walls has strengthened into a thin gold wash on wet stone. Though the air still carries enough cold to remind you that dawn in a noble household is not a gentle thing, the first loaves cool on boards. Steam rises from them in ghostly threads. A servant boy keeps glancing toward them with open longing, as though hoping one might fling itself nobly into his arms. It does not. Medieval bread, for all its virtues, is not known for romance. You barely have time to admire them before the next labour begins. The chief cook has arrived. He comes in beneath the lintel with the smell of frost on his cloak and authority in every impatient step. Master Ralph is not a large man, but kitchens do not require size so much as voice, memory, and the kind of stare that can make 3 people feel guilty at once. He strips off his gloves, inspects the bread with a glance sharp enough to cut pastry, checks the bubbling pottage, and nods once at the state of the hearth. This is his version of sunrise. Market, he says. At once. Fish if it's decent. Roots from the lower stall, not the fool by the gate. Herbs if any are fresh. Eggs counted. Apples if they have not gone soft. And watch the steward's tokens. That last part matters. In a noble household, even the buying of onions takes place under layers of authority. You do not simply arrive with a basket and good cheer. The steward keeps tallies, wax tablets, iron keys, and the kind of careful suspicion that makes every carrot feel like a legal matter. Goods are bought with marked counters or written orders where writing is possible, and every missing measure will one day be asked about by someone indoors and warm. So you wipe your hands, take up a coarse cloak, and accept the small leather pouch and tally tokens Master Ralph presses into your palm. Toma is sent with you, partly to carry what he can, and partly, you suspect, so that if he gets lost among the stalls someone will notice on account of the noise. Alice thrusts a basket into your hands. Another maid adds a cloth bag for herbs. Then you are out through the service gate and into the waking world. The path to the market skirts the outer yard, where stable boys are already currying horses with red hands and foul tempers. Their breath and the horses rise together in the chill. A cart with one wheel bound in fresh rope stands near the granary, waiting for repair. And you notice it because one of the wheel pegs has snapped, and the whole thing lists like a drunk at vespers. It is the sort of detail one sees once, and then somehow keeps seeing all day. Nearby, a mongrel dog with muddy paws and one torn ear watches you from beside a rain barrel. It is not the turnspit dog from the kitchen. This one is freer, thinner, and carries itself with the speculative look of an animal, deciding whether you're likely to drop anything edible before noon. You descend toward the lower street where the market gathers beyond the castle's main gate. Not every noble household sits beside a great town, but this one leans near enough to a busy road and a river crossing that traders drift in with goods from farms, fisheries, forest hamlets, and monasteries beyond the hills. Already the place is stirring. A tollman sits at his post with a cap pulled low and a face suggesting he was born annoyed. Carts creak over ruts. Women spread cloths over boards. A man with geese tied by the feet argues with another man whose geese look equally offended but more expensive. The smell of wet earth, dung, raw cabbage, stale ale, and river fish mixes into something sharp and honest. If the kitchen is a small kingdom of smoke and iron, the market is its noisy frontier. You move first toward the fish sellers, because good fish vanishes early and bad fish remains with a confidence no one admires. Their stall stands close to the gutter, where runoff carries away scales and blood, and the sort of odours that make you understand why saints are always painted looking upward. Baskets of eels twist in their own damp knots. Flat river fish lie on boards, silver dulled beneath the morning air. There are trout from the colder streams upriver, pike with accusing jaws, and a heap of smaller fish no one can quite identify once they're stewed enough. Master Ralph wants decent fish, and because he is a man who can tell whether a pike died too peacefully, you inspect them properly, eyes clear enough, gills bright enough, flesh springing back under thumb. A fishwife with arms like rolling pins watches you do this with deep contempt. "You buying or courting them?" she asks. "Only the ones with a better dowry," you say. She snorts, which in market terms means you have not entirely failed as a human being. You settle on 2 pike and a basket of smaller river fish for broth or frying, and the steward's token changes hands with all the joy of a tax. Toma carries the basket with the face suggesting martyrdom has arrived early. From there you turn to the root cellars. Piles of onions, leeks, parsnips, turnips, and carrots sit caked in enough mud to prove their sincerity. Cabbages stand in tight green fists. Garlic hangs in loops. A woman from the manor's outlying village, shawl pinned close against the cold, recognizes the household basket and gives you better leeks than the one by the gate would have managed. Master Ralph was right. The fool by the gate arranges his produce attractively, but seems to think freshness is a philosophical concept. As she weighs onions, she tells you in a low voice that the road from the abbey has been slow these 3 days because a cart overturned near the shrine by the ford. Some say the driver blasphemed and a saint took offence. Some swear the wheel simply found bad ground and the saint is being dragged into matters beneath his dignity. No one can quite agree whether shrines make roads safer or merely give travellers a more decorative place to complain. Still, you nod respectfully. In medieval life, skepticism may exist, but it wears a quieter coat than superstition. Next come herbs, and for these you search more carefully because dried bundles hang in every kitchen, but fresh green things in cold weather are another matter. At last you find a widow selling little bunches of parsley, sage, and winter savoury from a tray near the wall. She also offers charms against stomach wind made from knotted thread and fennel seed. Toma eyes these with deep interest. "My aunt says fennel tied at the wrist keeps bad dreams off," he says. "Your aunt says many things," you reply. "She was right about the black hen." You do not ask. In a world of leeches, relics, moon signs, and saints' bones of suspicious abundance, there is always some story involving a black hen that ends with either healing or embarrassment. You buy the herbs. Eggs come next, counted carefully into straw. Apples are found in a cellar stall where the better ones have been stored from autumn and the worse ones made into cider already. These are firm enough, though one has a bruise like a bishop's thumb. A round of coarse cheese appears too, added after Toma remembers Alice muttering about it before you left. Good. Memory in a kitchen can matter as much as skill. Forget the cheese and everyone learns your name for the wrong reason. The market swells around you as the morning grows. A friar passes with a begging bag and a patient face. 2 merchants in better cloaks than yours haggle over imported pepper, like men arranging a border treaty. A peddler holds up pilgrim badges stamped with saints and shrines, bright little pieces of lead or pewter to pin upon hat or hood. One shows St. James with his shell. Another carries the image of a local relic said to protect against fever, theft, and, according to one bold claim, lazy sons. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such badges are objects of devotion, advertisements of endurance, or simply the medieval equivalent of proving you have been somewhere uncomfortable. By the gate, a scribe sits on a stool with ink-stained fingers, ready to write letters for those who cannot. Nearby a woman sells hot oat cakes from a griddle, and the smell nearly undoes you. You buy one and split it with Toma, because even in a disciplined kitchen errand, a warm cake at the market can seem like evidence that God has not abandoned the earth entirely. It is coarse, smoky, a little burnt on one side, and magnificent. The torn-haired dog has followed you. You notice him when you turn from the oatcake woman and nearly step on his paw. He looks up as if the whole meeting was your decision. His coat is brown beneath the mud, his ribs just visible, his expression grave and shameless at once. "You again, you say?" Toma breaks off a bit of cake and drops it. The dog swallows without ceremony and falls in beside you with the air of someone who has entered service unofficially. Dogs in and around castles exist in every state, from treasured hound to tolerated thief, and this one seems to belong to the broad class of creature that no one owns but everyone has fed once. Loaded now with fish, roots, herbs, eggs, apples, bread, cheese, and the accumulating scent of wet rope and river scales. You begin the walk back uphill toward the gate. The weight drags at your arms. The baskets bite your fingers through the wicker. Around you the market only grows louder, fuller, more certain of itself. Yet you are already turning inward again, toward the kitchen, where all these cold and muddy fragments must be washed, chopped, salted, simmered, thickened, and transformed before anyone in the hall so much as lifts a spoon. Behind you the market keeps shouting, ahead the castle waits, hungry and unsurprised. And at your heel the tawny-eared dog follows as though he has always known where breakfast becomes history. The climb back to the castle feels steeper with full baskets than it did with empty ones, which is a truth so old it hardly needs saying, yet your shoulders insist on rediscovering it with every step. The gate stands open now to the day's ordinary traffic, a cart of firewood, 2 villagers with rent hens trussed by the feet, a messenger with mud to his knees, and a pair of guards whose chief talent appears to be leaning with conviction. The tawny-eared dog slips through beside you without challenge, as though he has achieved the rank of minor official by pure persistence. Toma glances at him. "If he steals a fish, it is your fault," he says. "That is generous," you reply. "I had hoped to blame the saints." Inside the service yard, everything has moved from sleepy beginning to full household motion. Laundry steams from a line where it can catch what little sun there is. A groom hurries past with a saddle over one shoulder. Somewhere above, a shutter bangs, then bangs again, because medieval architecture often seems to assume the weather will eventually apologize. You cross the yard quickly, protecting the eggs with one elbow, and duck back through the servants' entrance into heat, smoke, and that thick kitchen smell that by now has become your weather more than the sky has. The room has changed in your absence. It is the same kitchen, the same scarred tables and soot-black rafters, but now it moves with purpose in every corner. The chief cook stands near the main board with sleeves rolled and his knife already working through a bunch of leeks in quick, exact strokes. Alice kneads more dough, leaning into it like a woman wrestling an old grudge. One of the scullions scrubs trenches in a basin of hot water gone cloudy with grease. A younger maid carries in a crock of cream. The turnspit dog plods in his wheel with the tragic dignity of someone who knows effort is expected and gratitude unlikely. This is the kitchen's true face, not merely a room, but a small kingdom with ranks, territories, unwritten laws, and the occasional outbreak of low-level warfare over bowls. You set down the fish first. Master Ralph inspects the pike, presses one thumb to the flesh, lifts one gill, and gives the smallest nod. "Better than yesterday," he says. You take this for praise, because in kitchens praise is often delivered in units so modest they must be held up to the light to be seen. The smaller fish go into a tub for cleaning. The roots are tipped out by type onions with onions, turnips with turnips. Leeks apart from all decent society because they drag half the garden in with them. Herbs are laid carefully on a damp cloth. Eggs are counted aloud and counted again. Cheese goes to the side table, apples into the cool basket near the wall. Nothing enters this kingdom unjudged. Only after the goods are sorted do you truly settle back into your place within it. And your place, as you're reminded almost immediately, is not singular. No medieval kitchen runs on one pair of hands, no matter what grand tales later centuries like to tell about lone geniuses and secret recipes. A noble household kitchen is a chorus, a loud one, a tired one, a chorus that smells of onions. Each person here occupies a rung on a ladder everyone understands, even if nobody enjoys being on the lower steps. At the top stands Master Ralph, chief cook, guardian of flavour and temper, answerable to the steward and, on especially unfortunate days, to the lady of the household herself. Beneath him is Alice, who may or may not officially rank below him, but possesses the sort of practical authority that ignores neat diagrams. Then come the more trusted kitchen hands, those allowed near the spice box, the pastry table, the roasting meats, the sauces that can make or unmake a meal for the high table. Lower still are boys like Toma, scullions with red raw hands, ash carriers, peelers, water haulers, spit turners, and anyone new enough to be handed the least pleasant job before they can protest. You belong somewhere in the thick middle, useful enough to be trusted, low enough to be sent for fish. It is, honestly, an excellent medieval compromise. Alice jerks her chin at the leeks. You carry them to the washing trough and begin stripping away the outer layers, white and green, mud and all. Beside you, another worker, Joan, is plucking a chicken with the blank expression of someone who has accepted that life includes feathers in inconvenient places. She's broad-shouldered, quick-handed, and has a laugh that arrives rarely but decisively, like a dropped pan. "The market cheat you?" she asks. "Only spiritually," you say. "That is cheaper than usual." She snorts, and for a moment the whole room seems easier. These are the people who hold the day together, not the lord in his chamber, not the steward with his keys, not even the chaplain with his hours and bells. Here, among steam and knife scrape and ash, the kitchen workers make a kind of fellowship out of repetition. They know who limps more when rain is coming. They know whose hands shake before the chief cook notices. They know who pockets onion peels for a broth at home, who saves stale crusts for a sister in the village, who mutters prayers over pastry, who spits over the left shoulder before lifting a hot pot because her grandmother swore it prevented burns. Some swear that if a spoon falls and lands bowl down, a hungry guest will arrive before sunset. Others insist it only means someone was clumsy. No one fully agrees, but everyone glances when a spoon drops. And one does, not long after. Toma, reaching too quickly for the salt jar, knocks a wooden spoon from the edge of the board. It clatters to the floor and lands bowl down. There is a half-second of silence. Joan raises one eyebrow. Alice does not look up from her dough, but crosses herself with the hand not buried in flour. Master Ralph, who claims to have no patience for kitchen nonsense, says, "Pick it up and mind your fingers. We may have visitors." There it is, superstition dressed as scheduling. The tawny-eared dog, now fully inside the kitchen as if he has always paid taxes here, noses hopefully near the fish tub until Joan nudges him aside with her heel. He circles twice and settles in the least convenient path imaginable. No one throws him out. That is how creatures become part of a household in this world, not by invitation, but by remaining long enough that expulsion begins to seem like extra work. The morning unfolds in layers of labour. You wash and trim the leeks, then chop onions, then help clean the smaller fish, scraping scales from the skin while cold water numbs your fingertips. A maid named Nan grinds herbs with garlic and a pinch of salt in the mortar, her face serious as a monk illuminating scripture. At the far table, pastry dough is being rolled for later use, and that table belongs to a realm of its own. flour is finer there, voices are lower, mistakes cost more. You're near enough to admire, not yet near enough to belong. The chief cook moves through all of it like a man listening to several songs at once. He checks the hearth, adjusts the spit, tastes the pottage, sends one girl to the buttery, another to the herb loft, asks after the lard, rejects a cracked bowl, remembers the lord's nephew dislikes onions in visible form, and all the while keeps slicing with a speed that seems almost rude to the vegetables. Watching him, you understand something useful hierarchy here is not only about power, it is about memory under pressure. Who can keep 100 little needs alive in mind while the room grows hotter and louder around them? At one point the steward himself appears in the doorway, narrow-faced and iron-keyed, as if summoned by the mere scent of expenditure. His gaze travels over the fish, the bread, the baskets, the busy tables. He says nothing of value and leaves again. This, too, is part of the kitchen's small kingdom external threats arriving in respectable shoes. By late morning, the first rush of breakfast has given way to the more layered work of dinner preparations, and the kitchen settles into its hierarchy more plainly. Tasks sort themselves by trust. You are handed the herbs to strip and divide, some for common pottage, some for better sauces, some to be dried further and hung again. Joan takes the chicken, Nan tends the mortar, Toma is sent with ashes. Alice starts a second batch of bread and begins talking, half to herself and half to the room, about a feast she once helped prepare in a bishop's hall where the cook attempted a jelly moulded like a castle, and the whole thing sagged sideways before the first prayer. She tells it without smiling. The room still laughs. No one can quite agree whether that happened exactly as she says, but that is hardly the point. Kitchens keep their own legends. Burnt pies grow into epics. Misjudged salt becomes a caution passed down for years, a dropped roast, a spoiled cask. A miraculous recovery of sauce from near ruin, these enter household memory more surely than some battles do. And as you work among these people, under rafters stained by years of the same smoke, you begin to feel the shape of the kitchen as more than a workplace. It is crowded, hot, weary, quick to scold, quicker to mock, and utterly essential. It has its own loyalties, its own grudges, its own saints of competence and devils of carelessness. Outside, the noble household presents order to the world through stone walls, banners, and polished manners. Inside here, order is chopped, stirred, kneaded, scrubbed, and shouted into being. The day's ingredients lie all around you now, no longer market goods but kitchen goods claimed, judged, and put into service. The little kingdom is fully awake. Its knives flash, its pots murmur. Its workers move around one another with the practiced collisions of people who know there is not enough room and proceed anyway. And in the smoky heart of it, you take your place among them, as natural now as the hiss of onions hitting hot fat. By the time the sun has climbed high enough to send a pale stripe of light through the upper shutter, the kitchen has passed out of its morning scramble and into the steadier, heavier labour that follows it. Breakfast has gone where it needed to go. Bread has cooled. The pike wait their turn. The richer preparations for later still hover at the edges of the room like a promise nobody has time yet to enjoy. But now comes the work that fills the bones of the household rather than its pride. Now the lower tables must be fed. This is less glamorous than feeding lords and ladies, which is precisely why it matters so much. A noble hall likes to imagine itself arranged around the high table, all candles and polished cups and carved meats served with due ceremony. Yet the actual weight of a place like this rests elsewhere in the guards at the gate. The grooms in the stables, the laundresses at the vats, the boys in the yard, the women who mend linen by weak light, the porters who shoulder sacks into storehouses, the old retainers who no longer fight but still eat as if memory itself were hungry. Their meal will not be sung about. No minstrel composes a ballad for cabbage pottage. Still, let the lower tables go hungry for a single day, and the whole noble order begins to wobble like a stool on uneven rushes. So you turn to pottage again, because pottage is patient and democratic in its own rough way. The great pot has thickened to a soft bubbling mass of oats, peas, onions, and yesterday's broth, deepened now with leeks from market and a fistful of herbs cut smaller than they deserve. You stir with a long wooden paddle nearly the size of an oar, scraping the bottom so nothing catches and blackens. Steam wraps your face. The smell is plain, savoury, and reassuring, the sort of smell that says nobody will feast, but neither will they faint while mucking out stables. A second pot beside it takes cabbage and barley with scraps of salt pork too small or gristly for finer use. In a noble kitchen, even leftovers have social rank. Joan stands at the sideboard slicing coarse bread into chunks for trenchers and bowls. Toma carries more water and tries to look grown while managing to appear mostly damp. Alice skims fat from the broth with the concentration of a woman separating treasure from insult. Master Ralph moves through the room, but his eye is already beginning to shift toward the better dishes waiting later. This hour belongs more to the people in the middle and lower reaches of the kitchen, to those who know how to make abundance out of odds and ends. You ladle a little pottage into a wooden bowl and blow across the surface. It needs salt. Not much, just enough to wake it. A pinch goes in, then another stir. After that, a small scattering of parsley for freshness, because even common food deserves not to look defeated. At the far hearth, a pan is set over the coals for onions to soften in rendered fat. They hiss when they hit the iron. The smell changes at once, growing rounder and sweeter, and for a moment every person within 10 feet glances over as though drawn by a bell. There are few scents more persuasive than onions meeting hot fat in a hungry room. It is one of the quieter proofs that civilization, however muddy and underheated, is still trying. This meal must serve many mouths and many ranks. Not the high table, no, but not one table either. In a large household there are layers even among servants. Senior retainers may have better bread, a stronger broth, maybe a little cheese. Stable boys and field hands may get the thicker, plainer portions. A clerk or chaplain might receive fish on certain days when others receive beans. Some houses are stricter than others. Some are kinder. Some count every onion like a relic and expect gratitude if the bowl is merely warm. No one can quite agree whether the lower table's more peaceful or more political than the high one. A lord may quarrel over lands and marriages, but a groom will remember for a month if someone got the larger ladle of stew. You begin filling the first bowls. Thick pottage, dark bread, a little onion mixture stirred through for the elder servants, and on the side a wedge of yesterday's cheese shaved thinner than any saint would call generous. The bread trenchers for some will double as plates, once soaked through with broth and grease. They may be eaten, shared, tossed to dogs, or given away according to household custom. Those who tell the tale never fully agree about what happened to most trenchers in most castles, which is comforting in a way. History, like a kitchen floor, keeps only so much. A maid comes in from the laundry room red-faced from steam and asks whether the washerwomen may have their bowls early, because the vats are already going, and one of the younger girls looks ready to fall into the linen. You nod and fill 2 ahead of the rest. A guard from the gate follows soon after, helm under one arm, trying not to seem eager. He gets a bowl and a slab of bread thick enough to count as gratitude. Then a stable hand appears with straw in his hair and a smell suggesting he has spent the morning in close conversation with livestock. He takes his food in both hands as if you have offered him a gold reliquary. That is one of the strange kindnesses of kitchen work. Much of it is dull. Much of it hurts. Yet every so often you hand a bowl to someone colder or tireder than yourself, and for half a breath the whole world grows simpler. The tawny-eared dog has understood the new phase of the day before anyone announces it. He has stationed himself where the common bowls are being filled, his posture saintly, his eyes fixed on the bread with the solemn conviction of a creature who believes in miracles but prefers not to leave them entirely to chance. Joan tears off a bit of soaked crust and flicks it down without looking. The dog swallows it with grave appreciation. There are probably theologians nearby arguing subtler points than this, but none with so immediate a practical reward. As the servings go out, the kitchen briefly quiets in a particular way, not silent. Never silent, but less sharp-edged. The first rush of demand is being answered. People are eating. Wooden spoons scrape bowls beyond the doorway. Someone in the passage laughs through a mouthful and nearly chokes. Someone else complains that the pottage is thinner than last week and is told, correctly, that last week he had a cold and could not taste anything anyway. You keep working. More bowls, more bread, more steaming ladles. Your arm begins to ache from the repeated lift and pour, but there is rhythm in it now. Fill, pass, wipe, refill. Alice hands you a pan of softened onions to divide. Nan crushes dried herbs between her fingers and lets them fall into the cabbage pot. Toma returns with another stack of wooden bowls and nearly drops them when the tawny-eared dog threads between his ankles like an accusation. "Keep him out from underfoot," Master Ralph says. Nobody does. At last, when the lower servants have largely been fed and the kitchen can breathe again for a moment, you take your own bowl and sit on the edge of a bench near the wall. The pottage is thick enough to hold heat, thin enough to swallow quickly. Oats, onion, a little salt, a little leek, softness all the way down. You eat with a wooden spoon worn smooth from years of other hands. Around you the others do the same where they can, standing, leaning, crouched near the warmth, grabbing 10 mouthfuls before returning to some half-finished task. This is not a meal of leisure. It is a treaty between labour and endurance. Still, it has its comforts. You notice how the bread smells sweeter when torn open hot, how the onion fat catches at the back of the throat in the nicest way, how the steam from the bowl softens the soot-dry air around your face. Beyond the kitchen, through the half-open service door, you can hear distant household sounds continuing without pause, a cartwheel complaining in the yard, crows on the wall, one of the chapel bells sounding the next office, a child somewhere crying briefly and then deciding against it. The great life of the castle rolls on, but here, for a handful of breaths, there is warmth in your hands and enough food in your belly to keep the world from feeling openly hostile. Joan chews her bread and says, "Better than yesterday." "Everything's better than yesterday," says Alice. "That is not true," says Toma. "It is if you survive it," Alice replies. And this is apparently the nearest thing to philosophy the kitchen can spare before noon. Some swear that pottage tastes best when eaten standing, because sitting lets idleness into the bones. Others insist the first bite should always be taken in silence. So fortune is not startled away from the pot. Even now, it is hard to tell which beliefs are old custom and which were invented by tired people trying to sound wise. Either way, no one speaks for the first few spoonfuls. Hunger sees to that. Then the bowl's empty and the spell breaks. Benches scrape. Spoons are dropped into basins. Sleeves are rolled again. the kitchen shifts its weight forward, back toward labour, because feeding the lower tables is not the end of the day's work, but only the broad, solid step on which everything finer must stand. The pike still need cleaning. Better sauces wait. The pastry board calls. The high table, distant yet always approaching, begins once more to cast its long shadow into the room. But for now the common bowls have gone out warm, the bread has been shared, and the great hidden body of the household is fed enough to keep moving. Which, in a place like this, is very nearly the same thing as peace. When the last of the common bowls have been scraped clean, and the lower tables settle back into their own separate labours, the kitchen changes character again. It does not quiet, exactly. A noble household kitchen is no monastery library, and even monasteries, from what you hear, can be noisier than their paintings suggest. But the room narrows its attention. The broad work of keeping everyone upright gives way to the finer work of impressing those who believe themselves born to be impressed. This is where pride enters by the side door, powdered with flour and carrying a spice box. Master Ralph calls for the pastry board to be cleared, and at once the centre of the kitchen seems to shift toward that table, as if drawn by a tide. The pike remain for later, the cabbage pot mutters to itself, and the turnspit dog keeps on with his wheel. But a different kind of care has begun, not the care of simple sufficiency, the care of appearance, texture, fragrance, and all the little signs by which a noble household tells itself it is richer, steadier, and better governed than its neighbours. You wipe down the board with hot water and a clean cloth, then dust it with flour until the wood turns pale. Alice brings over a crock of lard, a bowl of sifted flour finer than what went into the common loaves, and a little jar of salt pinched sparingly, because even ordinary ingredients become expensive when handled elegantly enough. At the far shelf, the chief cook opens the spice box. That tiny act changes the room. Inside, wrapped and stoppered and guarded as carefully as jewels, lie the costly things that travel farther than most of the people who eat them ever will. Pepper, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, perhaps a little mace if the steward has not developed a devotional attachment to counting it. Their scent rises at once, warm and strange and almost sweet, like another climate opening briefly in the smoke-dark kitchen. Spices are not only flavour here, they are display. To scent a sauce with ginger or thicken a dish with almond milk is to announce that the household reaches beyond its own fields and fish ponds. Wealth, in part, smells imported. You are set to work on the pastry. This dough is not the soft bread dough of the morning. It is stiffer, richer in fat, meant to hold shape and endure heat without surrendering itself like a peasant in tax season. You cut the lard into the flour with careful fingers, working it until the mixture goes crumbly, then bringing it together with water a little at a time. Not too much. Never too much. Alice watches over your shoulder with a kind of silence that says she will allow you to succeed, but not charmingly fail. You press too hard, she says at last. You ease your hands. Pastry remembers, she adds. Mistreat it, and it tells on you. This may be kitchen wisdom. It may be threat. In practice, it amounts to the same thing. Nearby, Nan grinds almonds in the mortar with a patience that would shame saints. Almond milk is for finer days and finer diners, especially when dairy must be avoided or when a household wishes to give plain ingredients the illusion of nobility. Once the almonds are ground to paste, warm water is poured through cloth and squeezed, yielding a pale liquid that looks modest and costs more effort than it has any right to. No one can quite agree whether medieval cooks loved almond milk for its taste or for the satisfaction of turning nuts into a social statement? Probably both. On the range beside the hearth, a sauce begins to take shape, broth enriched with almond milk, thickened with breadcrumbs, sharpened with ginger, touched with verjuice for a tart edge. Master Ralph tastes it with the back of a spoon, narrows his eyes, and adds something from the spice box in a quantity so small it seems almost insulting. Then he tastes again and relaxes. Sauces here are not afterthoughts. They are a form of rhetoric. They persuade the diner that the meat beneath them is finer than meat alone could ever prove. You roll the pastry into rounds for small pies, some to hold minced fish and herbs, some perhaps for cheese and onion, depending on what is required at the upper tables and how inventive the chief cook feels when confronted by the steward's latest limitations. Raised pies in this world can be practical, decorative, or both. A crust may be meant to be eaten. It may be meant chiefly to hold. It may be so tough it serves the dish the way a roof serves a house, and is treated afterward with limited affection. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how many medieval pie crusts were delicious, and how many were, in truth, edible architecture. Still, yours must be handsome. You line the moulds, fit the dough with your fingers, trim the edge with a knife, and fill them carefully. Too little filling, and the pie looks mean. Too much, and it breaks open like gossip. Master Ralph passes by, glances once, and flicks a bit of extra herb into the fish mixture. Colour, he says. That is another thing the noble table expects. Not merely nourishment, but brightness, contrast, surprise, saffron for gold if the purse can bear it, parsley for green, egg glaze for shine. In the hall above, candles will strike these surfaces and make them seem even more luxurious than they are. Half of grand dining is flavour. The other half is theatre conducted on platters. Alice sets you next to shaping little decorative leaves from pastry scraps. You try not to take this as mockery. In truth, it is a mark of trust. Decorative work wastes precious dough if done badly and flatters the household if done well. You cut and score the pieces with the tip of a knife, then lay them over the pie lids. Suddenly the plain little parcels look purposeful, almost courtly, as though they have put on their best clothes. The torn-eared dog has approached again, lured by the fish filling and a hopefulness that would embarrass a lesser animal. Joan intercepts him with one foot and steers him away from the pastry table. No, she tells him. This is for people who think too much of themselves. The dog blinks, which may be agreement. At another board, the older kitchen boy is beating egg yolks for glazing while muttering the names of saints under his breath. You ask him why. So they do not scorch, he says. Which St. Govan's pie crust? All of them, if they know what's good. There is always some such custom in the kitchen. A crossed thumb in the flour to prevent splitting, a whispered blessing over milk so it will not curdle, a belief that pastry mixed during thunder goes tough. Some swear that if a crust cracks before baking, someone at the high table will quarrel before the meal ends. Others say cracked pastry merely means the cook was careless and would rather blame fate. Even now, it is hard to tell where superstition ends and professional anxiety begins. The first pies go into the oven. You slide them in with the peel, careful not to knock their edges, and feel the dry wave of heat strike your face. Inside, the earlier bread has left the bricks mellow and fierce in equal measure. This is good pastry heat, or so Alice says, which means you now believe it with devotional sincerity. The oven mouth is closed part way, and there is nothing to do but wait and attend, like a physician beside an aristocrat too delicate to recover without witnesses. Meanwhile, the sauce thickens. A pan of onions softens into sweetness. cheese is grated. More herbs are chopped, this time finer, because refinement is often just the same action performed in smaller pieces. Master Ralph begins discussing the evening meal with Alice in a low voice. You catch only fragments, guests perhaps, or the possibility of guests, and a note of concern over whether the apples are good enough to be stewed with spice, or whether they should be hidden in a tart where no one can accuse them openly. This is the strange tension of fine cooking in a noble household. It is full of aspiration and concealment. Plain things must become rich things. Imperfect things must become handsome. A pie with a slightly over-brown edge is still edible, but at the upper table it may be treated as though civilization itself has thinned at the crust. Here, a meal must satisfy hunger and preserve reputation. Between those aims stands you, covered in flour, trying not to overwork the dough. When the pies are drawn out at last, their tops are shining and pale gold, their pastry leaves browned at the tips, their seams intact. The room gives one of those tiny shifts that mark collective relief, not a cheer. Kitchens rarely cheer unless something has fallen, but shoulders loosen, breath returns. Alice nods once and says, "Better." Master Ralph cracks open one of the smallest to inspect the filling. Steam rises rich with fish, herbs, and spice. He tastes it, then passes you a morsel on the point of the knife. You take it carefully. The crust is firm but tender enough. The filling is warm, fragrant, sharper than common food, deeper somehow, touched by ginger and onion and the clean greenness of herbs. It tastes of labour disguised as elegance, of the market cleaned and trimmed and enclosed in pastry until it can enter the hall as something gentler than river flesh and root. For a moment, in the heat and smoke and flour dust light, you feel the whole trick of noble cookery at once, how rough work becomes soft food, how common hands shape uncommon appearances, how pride can be baked into a crust no thicker than a thumb. Then Master Ralph takes the rest, because beauty in a kitchen is always brief, and there is more to prepare. By the time the pies have cooled enough to be moved without heartbreak, the day has shifted again, and the kitchen must shift with it. Light falls differently now through the high shutter, less silver, more tired. The first broad hunger of a morning has been answered. The finer work for the upper tables has begun to gather shape on boards and in ovens, and now another force settles over everything, one older than appetite and far stricter than taste. The calendar. In a noble household, the cook does not answer only to the stomach or the steward. There is also the church, with its long patient hand laid across the year. Feast days, fast days, saints' days, vigils, ember days, Lent, Fridays, eves before certain holy times, these pass through the kitchen as surely as carts pass through the gate. A careless cook may burn a pie. A reckless one may put lard into the wrong pot on the wrong day, and discover that theology has opinions about supper. Today is not the hardest kind of fast, but it is strict enough to complicate things. Master Ralph says it only once while checking the fish table and the broth pot at the same time. No dripping in the sauce for the upper board, butter kept back, fish first. No one argues, everyone simply adjusts, because this is what kitchens in such a world do. Religion here is not merely bells in a chapel or candles before a painted saint. It is also the practical question of what may simmer in which pan before dusk without scandal. You can almost believe that half of Christian civilization is held together by prayer, and the other half by someone remembering which fat is permitted. The pike from market are brought forward at once. Their scales are already scraped, their insides cleaned, their pale flesh rinsed and laid out on cloth. Beside them the smaller river fish wait to be stewed down for broth. Nan brings the almonds again. Alice mutters about onions. Joan lifts a crock of oil from the shelf, a dearer substitute than fat from the roasting pan, and one that always makes the steward look as though he has swallowed a nail. Fast days do strange things to a kitchen. They forbid, but they also inspire. Since meat and animal fat are limited or denied on the stricter ones, cooks turn clever. Fish is made to stand where beef cannot. Almond milk steps into the place of cream. Breadcrumbs thicken what marrow once might have deepened. Herbs, mustard, sharp verjuice, dried fruits, and imported spices are asked to work harder, to distract the tongue from what devotion has removed from the table. Piety, it turns out, can be very inventive when hungry. You set to work with the fish, rubbing the flesh with salt, parsley, and a little crushed ginger. On another board, a sauce is begun from broth, almond milk, breadcrumbs, and verjuice, sharpened further with mustard pounded smooth. The smell is different from the richer meat preparations of ordinary days, cleaner, brighter, a little sour at the edges, as though the whole kitchen has drawn in its waste and decided to appear respectable. Toma watches as Alice tips more almonds into the mortar. "All this for fish," he says in the tone of one contemplating injustice. "All this because of fish," Joan replies. "That is nearer the truth. Fish is not a mere replacement here. It is an entire fast-day world of its own. Rivers, ponds, salted barrels, smoked stores, eel baskets, monastery fisheries, whole networks of labour feed the religious calendar. In wealthier households, fish days can still be splendid. Pike, trout, lamprey if you're rich enough or unlucky enough, herrings from far off, eels in pies, cod preserved with enough salt to survive a siege and still remain unpleasantly memorable. The church forbids meat, and the cook responds with a fish so carefully sourced it arrives at table looking almost triumphant. No one can quite agree whether fast days were meant to humble the appetite or simply educate it into more expensive habits. At the side hearth, you begin a pot of fish broth from the smaller river catch, onions, herbs, and water. It starts plain. It never stays plain. A kitchen like this distrusts plainness on principle. Soon in go breadcrumbs for body, a little vinegar for life, a scrap of saffron that Master Ralph allows with visible pain because the upper table must still look as if the household is prospering under God rather than merely obeying him. A servant from the chapel passes through on an errand and pauses just long enough to remind everyone that tomorrow marks a saint's vigil, and that the lady has asked whether the evening meal should reflect the day with due seriousness. Master Ralph answers with a look so controlled it nearly qualifies as holy. "With due seriousness," he says. The servant leaves. Joan, plucking herb leaves from their stems, murmurs, which means fewer jokes in the sauce. Alice says the sauce was never joking. There are customs layered beneath the rules too, little habits and household interpretations passed down until no one remembers where they began. Some kitchens avoid eggs on certain fast days more strictly than others. Some allow butter where others insist on oil. Some swear that fish caught before sunrise is more fitting for a vigil meal. Others say the saints are not river inspectors. Even now, it is hard to tell whether half these customs come from learned instruction, local habit, or one anxious cook long ago deciding caution was easier than argument. The tawny-eared dog has learned that fish days offer opportunities of a special kind. He stations himself beside the cleaning trough with reverent focus. His nose twitches each time a strip of skin or bone lands in the scrap pail. Toma drops him a piece so small it barely counts, and the dog swallows it with such solemn gratitude that you begin to suspect he was a monk in a previous life, demoted for theft. Meanwhile, The fast-day dishes multiply. A tart of onions and herbs bound with almond milk. The small fish pies from earlier, now designated for those of decent rank but not the highest. A platter of pike dressed with chopped parsley and laid over toasted bread to catch the juices. Stewed apples with a little cinnamon for later, because restraint has always made room for sweetness if properly supervised. The smell in the kitchen becomes stranger and finer at once. Less of roasting fat, more of warm spice and sharp herb and that faint sweet nuttiness of almond milk. It is not the comforting heaviness of common pottage or the proud richness of meat days. It is leaner, cleverer, almost argumentative, as if every dish is saying, "Very well, if we may not rely on grease, we shall rely on skill and see who complains first." And of course someone does. The steward appears, drawn perhaps by the scent of saffron the way hawks are drawn by motion. His gaze falls upon the oil crock, then the almond bowl, then the spice box sitting open a finger's width. "Costly devotion," he says. "Cheaper than sin," says Master Ralph without looking up. There is a brief silence in which several souls hang delicately in the balance. Then the steward, perhaps deciding that theology is not a fight worth losing in a kitchen, only sniffs and counts the pies with his eyes before departing. You try not to smile. Kitchens remember such lines for years. As the afternoon deepens, the food comes together. The pike are poached gently until the flesh just yields. The almond sauce is strained smooth through cloth. The onion tart is baked until the top freckles gold. Bread is sliced and set ready to receive fish and broth. Nan dusts one platter with chopped herbs so evenly it looks almost embroidered. On stricter days the meal might feel sparse. Today it feels disciplined, but still generous. The sort of table that says the household is obedient, prosperous and unwilling to be dull. There is, beneath all this, a curious tenderness to fast-day cooking. It asks you to work around absence, to notice what remains possible, to make a good meal not in defiance of restraint, but through it, in a world that believes the soul must sometimes be trained by denial. The kitchen becomes the place where denial is softened just enough to be born. Some swear that food prepared on a fast day carries a special blessing, especially if the cook keeps quiet while stirring. Others say hungry people always invent holiness around dinner. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Still, when the first platter is finished and set aside for carrying, even the kitchen pauses a little. The fish gleams pale beneath its green herbs. The sauce lies smooth and fragrant beside it. The tart holds together. The apples shine softly in their spice syrup. No meat, no dripping, no boastful richness of roast and bone and gravy, yet the table will not feel poor. It will feel careful. It will feel observant. It will feel, in its own complicated way, devout. And in the smoky kitchen below, with almond milk drying on your knuckles and fish steam rising around you, you have helped turn religious rule into something warm enough to eat. By now the day has reached that long hot middle stretch, when time in the kitchen starts to feel less like a sequence of hours, and more like one continuous cloud of labour. The light outside may be turning slowly across the yard. The chapel bells may still be doing their pious best to divide the afternoon into proper portions. But beneath the rafters all of that begins to blur. Here, the true measure of time is heat. How long the oven holds, how quickly the spit turns, how soon the next pot must be shifted before it catches, how many times you wipe your brow with the back of your wrist before the skin there becomes streaked with flour, ash, and salt. The kitchen is fully a furnace now. Smoke does not pour thickly enough to blind. Not today, but it lingers everywhere, caught in the beams above like a second ceiling. It softens the edges of things. It turns the shafts of light from the high shutter into visible bars. It settles into cloth, into hair, into the fine lines of your knuckles. Your tunic smells no longer of wool or morning mist, but of old fire and fresh fire, and every fire that has ever happened in this room. There is sweat at your neck and soot on your forearm. One side of your face feels baked. The other still remembers winter whenever the outer door opens. It is impossible to be comfortable in a medieval kitchen for long, which perhaps explains why nobody wastes effort trying. You're sent to the hearth to help with the larger cooking now that the fast-day dishes have been set in order, and the room turns its attention toward the evening meal for the higher tables. A joint of meat has gone onto the spit at last for those permitted to eat more richly later mutton, perhaps, or pork, rubbed with herbs and salt until the skin glistens. The turnspit dog resumes his melancholy office, trotting inside the wheel with the expression of a creature who has seen the future and found it repetitive. Every few turns the spit catches the light differently, fat hissing as it drips into the pan beneath, and the smell deepens the whole room into something richer, darker, heavier than it was an hour before. Near the main hearth, 3 pots compete for space and attention. One holds stock being reduced, another takes onions and herbs for a sauce that must not scorch. The third is heating water for washing platters and hands before the last rush begins. Every time you shift one, another threatens to boil over. Every time you think the fire is right, a fresh billet changes its temper. A kitchen hearth is not a single flame, but a battlefield of little climates hotter to the left, sullen in the back, too fierce near the front, good for simmering only if you know exactly where to place the iron feet. Master Ralph knows, Alice knows, Joan knows. You are learning, which means mostly learning by getting too close once and not repeating the error. When you reach for a pan handle without the folded cloth properly wrapped around your hand, the heat bites straight through your carelessness. You hiss, drop the handle back, and shake your fingers. Alice glances over but does not pause in her kneading. "There," she says. "Now you'll remember." In another age, someone might offer a lecture. In this one, the burn is the lecture. Joan passes you a bit of cool onion crushed with grease and sage to rub near the reddened skin. Not on it. My mother swore by it, she says, or else by goose fat, or prayer. It depended what was cheapest. Leeches, herbs, charms, soot, ale, goose grease, plantain leaves, spider webs to stop bleeding. Medieval life has a remedy for almost everything, especially the things it cannot really cure. Some swear that carrying a hazel twig cut on a saint's day prevents kitchen burns. Others say the only true protection is to keep your wits about you and your sleeves tied back. Even now, it is hard to tell where medicine ends and habit begins, but everybody has a method and nobody trusts bare luck. The heat rises steadily. Your shoulders feel it first as a weight, then your scalp, then your eyes, which sting each time the smoke shifts low instead of climbing cleanly toward the hood. Toma coughs near the wood stack and gets told, almost in chorus, not to waste breath complaining. Nan opens the side door for a moment, and cold air slices through the room like a blessing before Master Ralph orders it shut again because the draught is making the flame misbehave. That is the rule of kitchens. Every relief creates a new problem. The roasting meat demands basting. You take the long spoon and tip pan juices back over the turning flesh, listening to the sizzling answer. The smell is glorious in a shameless sort of way. It is the opposite of fast-day cleverness. It is direct, persuasive, almost rude in its confidence. Fat, salt, heat. Even the torn-eared dog rises from his corner and drifts closer with reverent eyes. He and the turnspit dog exchange a look of mutual professional interest. At the pastry side, more little preparations continue despite the furnace at the centre. A tray of apples waits to be stewed. Cheese is being softened. Bread for the upper boards is being sliced with more care than the rough loaves for common service ever see. Nan, her sleeves rolled high, whisks a sauce smooth while sweat beads at her temples and disappears into the flour dust already on her skin. In a cooler age, perhaps all of this would seem elegant. Here it feels like elegance carried uphill in buckets. You fetch more wood, because the fire consumes every victory as soon as it is won. Out in the stack room the air feels dim and breathable by comparison. The logs are rough against your palms, and bits of bark catch at your sleeves. When you return, the heat strikes again so suddenly that it is like stepping into an argument already in progress. The room has become louder too, not because anyone is shouting more than before, but because hot labour has a sound of its own iron against iron. Lids knocked aside, the scrape of peels, the hard exhale of someone lifting, the muttered half-swear when a sleeve brushes steam. No one can quite agree whether kitchen heat makes tempers worse, or merely reveals what was already waiting beneath them. Either way, by this point in the day, patience wears thin as old linen. Toma is sent to skim a pot and takes too much with the scum. Master Ralph snaps at him. Toma flushes, tries to correct it, nearly upsets the ladle, and Joan catches the pot before disaster. A moment later everyone is back at work as though nothing happened. Because in kitchens offence must often make room for urgency. There's no time to nurse dignity while onions brown too fast. A servant from upstairs arrives with a message that the lady's cousin has joined the household unexpectedly for supper. This produces the sort of silence normally reserved for funerals or broken glaze. One more guest means one more portion at the upper end. One more plate to make look deliberate rather than divided. Master Ralph absorbs the news without outward drama, which is how you know he is furious. More sauce, he says. Slice the apples thinner, and find whether there's another loaf cooling. That is how crises appear in this world, not always as storms or sieges, but as one extra noble turning up hungry. You move faster. The heat seems to press at your back and chest alike now, as though the kitchen is trying to flatten everyone into usefulness. Your tunic clings damp between the shoulder blades. Your hair, if you touched it, would probably feel like smoked rope. Soot marks your wrist. Flour marks your hip. There is a point in such labour where you stop feeling especially separate from the room around you. You're simply one more hot, moving part of it. And still the work keeps its strange beauty. The roasting meat bronzes and shines. The apples begin to soften in wine-dark liquid with cinnamon and a little honey. The sauce smooths out under steady stirring. The breads pile up in cloth-lined baskets. Ladles catch the firelight. Steam lifts in pale banners. Above everything, the rafters remain black and watchful, storing years of smoke the way old churches store prayers. Some say kitchens are dangerous places for the soul because they breed gluttony, temper, and gossip in equal measure. Some say they are holy in their own way because they keep bodies alive and turn labour into comfort. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Standing here with aching shoulders and hot cheeks, you suspect both judgments may be true at once. At last there comes a short lull, not because the day has softened, but because all the current fires have been fed, and all the current pots are where they must be for this fleeting moment. You lean one hand on the table edge and breathe. The outer world feels far away. The bells, if they ring now, reach you only faintly. The market, the yard, the towers, the river mist of morning, all of that seems to belong to another life. Here there is only heat, smoke, breath, labour, and the smell of food becoming itself. Then the roasting joint spits hot fat at your sleeve, and the moment passes. You laugh once despite yourself, because the kitchen has a way of refusing poetry for more than a heartbeat. And beneath the soot-black rafters, in the deep red weather of the hearth, the long day burns on. The fiercest heat of the day does not last forever, even in the kitchen, where fire seems to rule with absolute confidence. There comes a brief turning after the great middle labour, a loosened stretch in which the room still works but no longer roars. The ovens keep their warmth, the hearth breathes deep and red, pots stay in motion, yet the sharpest edge has passed, and into that narrow space slips another old companion of household life talk. Not loud talk, not idle talk exactly. Nothing in a place like this is ever fully idle. But the work changes tempo. Hands continue while voices, having survived the heat, begin to wander. You're set to trimming herbs and sorting smaller tasks at the side table, where the light from the upper shutter lands in a dusty bar across the board. Nan strains sauce through cloth nearby. Joan is gutting another pair of fish with the practical calm of someone who no longer finds inner organs especially dramatic. Alice, whose relationship with rest appears entirely theoretical, sits for the first time all day only because sitting allows her to pare apples faster. Even Master Ralph has moved from immediate flame to measured supervision, which in kitchen terms counts as an afternoon lull. This is when the stranger beliefs of the place tend to surface. Perhaps it is because tired people become more honest. Perhaps because repetitive work leaves the tongue free. Or perhaps because every kitchen, after enough years of smoke and burns and lucky escapes, begins to collect its own little religion made of half memory, household custom, and whatever no one has dared disprove. It begins with salt. Toma, carrying a small crock to the board, sets it down badly and spills a bright scatter of salt across the wood. He freezes. Joan looks up at once. Nan mutters, "Ah!" Even the torn-eared dog lifts his head from beneath the bench, though likely from hope rather than superstition. "Over the left shoulder," Joan says. Toma blinks. Why left? "Because the devil waits on the other side." "No one can quite agree whether he truly does," says Alice, slicing apple peel in one continuous ribbon. "But if you spill salt and do nothing, the rest of the day grows mean." Toma pinches a little and flings it over his left shoulder at once. Most of it lands on the floor. The dog sniffs it, decides even desperation has limits, and backs away. You smile and gather the spilled salt into a smaller heap, saving what can be saved. Salt is too dear to surrender entirely to the invisible. Yet the motion is careful, almost respectful. That is how such things work here. Even those who mock them rarely ignore them. From there the stories begin. Nan says her grandmother kept fennel above the kitchen door because it turned away ill luck and wandering spirits. Joan says her uncle swore a rowan twig tucked in the rafters prevented milk from souring in thunder. Alice says nothing for a while, which means she is waiting for everyone else to lower their standards before offering something truly unsettling. At last she says, "In my mother's house. No knife was ever left crossed with another overnight. Bad for peace." "Peace in the kitchen," says Joan. "Then the knives should sleep in church." A small laugh moves around the table. Still, you think of the crossed spoons, the cracked crusts, the spoon-dropped bowl down earlier, and how quickly even practical people glance toward omen when the day is uncertain. Kitchens breed that habit. So much can go wrong for reasons you can name: bad wood, spoiled fish, damp flour, clumsy hands, and for reasons you cannot. When life depends on flame, weather, storage, and the moods of powerful people, one begins to leave room for luck, even if only out of politeness. You strip some leaves from their stems and add them to a bowl. The smell rises warm and dry and almost dusty sweet. On the shelf above hang bundles of sage, rosemary, yarrow, and lavender, some for flavour, some for keeping moths from cloth, some perhaps for uses so old no one remembers whether they began in medicine or magic. Medieval households do not draw a sharp line between remedy and charm. A herb may be good for the stomach, good for the soul, and good for frightening away whatever lurks in the dark between the barn and the privy. Efficient. Really? Joan wipes her knife and says, "My aunt burned juniper when a child had the night crying." The one with the black hen says Toma. The same. I still think that story ended badly. It ended quietly, says Joan, which is not exactly reassuring. No one can quite agree whether these little household rites work because of nature, grace, fear, or pure coincidence. Some swear by charms sewn into hems, tiny prayers written and folded into leather, sprigs of herb hung over cradles, iron nails driven above thresholds. Some swear just as strongly that such things are nonsense and then quietly carry a saint's badge in the lining of their cloak all the same. In a world where fever can come overnight and a bad winter can empty a storehouse faster than arithmetic would suggest, certainty is a luxury mostly owned by fools. A servant girl from upstairs slips into the kitchen to fetch warmed wine for one of the older ladies and pauses long enough to contribute her own certainty if a beeswax candle gutters blue. Someone at the house is lying. Alice dismisses this at once. Someone in the house is always lying. Then the candle is doing its duty, Joan says. Again the laugh goes around, softer this time. The afternoon's quieter tasks continue under the talk. Apples are sliced thinner for stewing. A bundle of leeks is sorted. The best portions kept for a later dish, and the ragged greens set aside for broth. The fish bones from earlier are boiled down further. Nan crushes mustard seed. You help lay out trenchers and clean cloths for the serving tables. It is work that needs doing but not rushing, and so the mind moves more freely through old stories. Toma, encouraged now, says that in his village people nailed a horseshoe over the byre door to keep cattle from wasting. Joan says everyone knows that. Nan adds that a horseshoe only works if found, never bought. Alice says any object will acquire a reputation if it hangs long enough in a house where nothing else improves. Master Ralph, passing by with a spoonful of sauce for tasting, hears the last part and grunts approval. Then comes the matter of burns. You flex your hand where the earlier brush with hot iron still lingers as a tender red along the fingers. Joan notices and asks if you spoke over it after cooling. Spoke what? A blessing. I hissed. That may serve, she says. According to Joan, one should murmur a short charm while holding the burn near cool water, or else trace a cross above it 3 times with the thumb of the opposite hand. According to Alice, cold water and not being foolish are better than poetry. According to Nan, her mother laid spiderweb over small cuts to stop bleeding, and though it sounds like madness, it often worked, even now. It is hard to tell whether these practices are old wisdom wrapped in superstition, or superstition occasionally stumbling into wisdom. Either way, nobody in the kitchen entirely laughs at remedies until they have needed one. The tawny-eared dog rises at last and pads over to settle near your feet, head on paws, watching the apple peels fall. The turnspit dog, released for a while from his wheel, limps to the water bowl and drinks with loud dedication. For a moment the 2 dogs share the same patch of floor without argument, as if united by professional exhaustion. There is something almost solemn in it. From outside comes the muffled sound of a cart passing in the yard, then a distant bell from the chapel, The note drifts through stone and smoke alike. It reminds you how long the day has become. Morning mist, market mud, the crackle of first kindling, all of it feels both recent and impossibly far away. The half-burned candle from before dawn still sits by the back shelf, stumped low and unnoticed now. Yet somehow it seems to bind the day together, a little pale witness to all this ash and labour. Alice finally offers her own most guarded belief. "In my mother's kitchen," she says, not looking up from the apples, "we never swept crumbs out after sunset, only inward, never toward the door." "Why?" asks Toma. "She said luck goes with them." "Did it?" Alice thinks for a moment. The crumbs certainly did. That wins the largest laugh of the afternoon, and even Master Ralph smiles without consenting to be seen doing it. The lull does not last, of course. Nothing useful ever does. Soon enough another message will arrive. Another platter will need arranging, another sauce reheating, another small emergency dressed as routine. But for this little stretch, under the high, dusty light and the soot-black rafters, the kitchen allows itself the luxury of old nonsense, half-believed wisdom, and the comfort of shared habits. And you begin to understand that a noble household is held together not only by walls, duties, and ledgers, but also by these quieter things: a pinch of salt over the shoulder, a rowan twig in the beam, a muttered charm over a burn, a joke told at the exact point in the day when tired people need one. Small protections against a large, uncertain world. The lull ends the way such lulls always do in a household that believes order can be maintained by counting things. Not with a shout, not with a dropped platter or a blazing curtain, with keys. You hear them before you see him, a dry metallic clink from the passage, measured and self-important, like a small procession of iron opinions approaching the doorway. A moment later the steward steps into the kitchen with his ledger under one arm, a wax tablet hanging from a cord, and a ring of keys at his belt large enough to suggest he would lock the weather if given a latch. The room does not stop, but it adjusts. Master Ralph straightens only slightly, which in him counts as civility. Alice continues slicing, because there are forms of rank even the steward knows better than to test directly. Joan wipes her hands. Toma looks, for one brief guilty second, as if he has personally stolen all the household onions. You yourself become suddenly conscious of every bowl, crock, loaf, herb bunch, eggshell, and dripping spoon in sight, as though the whole kitchen has been transformed into evidence. The steward's name is Osbert, though in practice he answers just as well to any title involving caution, subtraction, or mild suspicion. He is not cruel. Worse, perhaps, he is conscientious. A cruel man may be escaped in mood or distance. A conscientious man follows everything to its conclusion. In a noble household, he stands between abundance and ruin, at least in his own mind. He counts flour, salt, wax, ale, fish, oats, wood, pepper, linen, candle stubs, and no doubt the number of breaths wasted in doorways. Somewhere in the castle there may be songs about gallant knights. There are none about Osbert, though one suspects he keeps the roof from falling more often than the knights do. He sets the ledger on the sideboard and surveys the room with the grave disappointment of a man entering a place where he knows people have recently spent resources. "Master Ralph," he says. "Master Osbert." There is enough courtesy in the exchange to prove they have argued often, and will argue again. The steward begins where all such men begin stores. He wants to know what remains of the fine flour after the morning loaves and the pastry. He wants a count of the eggs left whole and the eggs used in glaze. He wants to see the herb basket. He wants confirmation that the apples from market were sorted, and that the bruised ones were set aside for stewing rather than displayed where a guest might draw philosophical conclusions about the estate. He wants to know whether the almond stock must be replenished before the next church fast, and whether the cook truly needed saffron in the fish broth, or merely wished to make piety look expensive. Master Ralph answers in clipped phrases while continuing to taste, adjust, and direct. Flour enough, eggs counted, herbs trimmed, bruised apples stewed, almonds low, saffron necessary. Each reply is flat enough to sound permanent. You are sent to fetch the flour measure from the shelf, then the egg basket, then the salt crock, because stewardship is theatre as much as arithmetic, and no inspection feels complete unless objects are moved, uncovered, tapped, and frowned at. Osbert peers into bins, lifts cloths from cooling bread, opens the spice box only as far as decency and terror permit, and makes marks with a stylus so quickly on the wax tablet that it sounds like a beetle crossing bark. No one can quite agree whether stewards are born suspicious or trained into it by the sight of kitchens. A room full of food, heat, knives, and tired people does not present itself as naturally reassuring. The iron keys at Osbert's belt catch your eye each time he turns. They are long, dark, and heavy, their bows polished by years of handling. There are keys for the pantry, the cellar, the buttery, the spice chest, the store loft, perhaps the treasury, though one imagines that key is kept closer still. In households like this, keys are power made visible. A lord may own everything in theory, but the person who opens the oak door to the winter storehouse controls whether theory becomes supper. It is one thing to possess a barrel of salted fish in law. It is another to know where the key is when snow lies deep and everyone is hungry. Osbert asks after the wood next. How much left under cover? Enough for tonight, says Joan. That was not my question. It is the important part of the answer. A flicker passes across Master Ralph's face, quickly disguised as interest in a sauce. You look toward the stack room and think of how fast the billets vanish, how the oven swallows whole armfuls without apology, how the hearth consumes every hour as though heat were a form of tribute. The steward makes another mark. Winter storehouses, wood stacks, salted barrels, sacks of oats, honey crocks sealed with wax, smoked fish hanging in the cool dark. These are the true secret rooms of medieval life. Feast halls may glitter, chapels may ring, but survival lives in storage. He asks about waste. This is where the kitchen stiffens properly. Waste is a moral category in such a household, almost a theological one. Bones may be boiled twice. Stale bread becomes trenchers, crumbs, thickener, feed. Vegetable tops go to broth or beasts. Fat is rendered. Dripping is saved. Ash may scrub. Broken pottery is useful until it becomes dangerous. To waste food, fuel, salt, or cloth is not merely sloppy. It is close to sin in material form. Fish bones are in broth, says Alice before he can ask. Apple skins. Boil down for the scullions. The stale crusts. Not wasted. What of the fat skimmed from the morning pot? At this, Nan lifts a small covered crock from the shelf and sets it down with the solemnity of presenting relics. Osbert nods once. Peace, if not joy, is preserved. The tawny-eared dog chooses this exact moment to nose under the sideboard and emerge with something that may once have been part of a trencher. Every eye in the room goes briefly to him. Osbert stares. The dog, sensing perhaps that he has crossed into administrative territory, freezes with the crust in his mouth. That creature, says the steward slowly, is not entered in any provision count. He is self-supplying, Joan says. Toma makes a strangled noise into his sleeve. Master Ralph keeps his face entirely still, which is the bravest act so far attempted today. Osbert exhales through his nose, chooses not to pursue the fiscal implications of dog bread, and returns to the ledger. It is hard not to admire him a little for this. A lesser man would have fought the point until nightfall. Then he notices the almond stock. You knew he would. The bowl sits there too frankly, and almonds on fast days may be acceptable but are never invisible to a steward's eye. He asks how much remains, how much was used in the sauce, how many more vigils fall before the next delivery from town, whether the last purchase was entered at the old price or the new one after river tolls rose. This is the world beneath the meal, the hidden structure of tokens, measures, and ledgers that allows the kitchen's noisy art to go on. One can make a fine sauce with almond milk. One can also, through too much enthusiasm, reduce a household to arguing with bean porridge by February. Even now, it is hard to tell whether Osbert distrusts cooks because they spend, or whether cooks distrust Osbert because he reminds them spending has edges. Master Ralph finally turns from the hearth and faces him properly. There may be one extra at the upper board tonight. Osbert's expression alters by half a breath. An additional diner at the high table is not catastrophe, but neither is it trivial. It means another serving shaped from the same roast, another ladle of sauce, another measure of bread, maybe more candles, more wine, more expectation. The noble household lives by these small flexings, each one absorbed by labour below stairs. Who? The lady's cousin, I am told. Osbert nods once, grimly. Perhaps he's already recalculating within himself the invisible arithmetic of guest right, prestige, pantry, and tomorrow's breakfast. Then the portions must be managed, he says. That phrase hangs in the air with all the warmth of sleet. Managed portions. A noble way of saying everyone below may eat a touch less richly, so someone above need not notice division. This, too, is part of the kitchen's reality. Grandeur upstairs is often bought by skillful rearrangement downstairs. Master Ralph gives a short nod. No argument, not because he agrees fully, but because he has already begun doing the same sums in his head. The steward makes his final marks, closes the ledger, and lifts it again beneath one arm. Before leaving, he checks the spice box lock with the kind of tenderness other men reserve for infants. Then he turns toward the door. The keys sound once more against his belt. At the threshold he pauses and looks back over the room, not hostile, not friendly, simply measuring as ever. See that the bread from this morning is turned properly, he says, no damp in the cloth, and the winter onions in the rear bin are to be used next. The outer skins are going. Then he is gone. The kitchen breathes again. Joan mutters, I have met ghosts with a softer tread. Alice says, ghosts do less bookkeeping. Even Master Ralph lets out something close to a laugh. Yet after he has left, his presence remains in the room the way the smell of smoke remains in cloth. You feel it in the repositioning of the apple tray, the covering of the almond bowl, the careful folding back of the cloth over bread, the silent awareness that every ladle and handful is part of a larger count. The kitchen is not merely heat and craft and appetite. It is management. It is stores. It is restraint. Behind every pie crust and shining sauce stands a ring of iron keys and a man who knows how many onions remain in winter. And as you turn the loaves, check the cloth for damp and move the older onions forward from the rear bin where they wait with papery skins and a faint sharp smell. You understand that feeding a noble household means not only cooking well for one night, it means thinking like winter. After the steward leaves, the kitchen does not so much relax as shift its anxiety to a more immediate subject. Ledgers and keys belong to the long fear of winter, of dwindling stores and too many mouths. But now another fear takes hold, the shorter, sharper fear that arrives whenever people of consequence are expected at table and wish to feel themselves properly welcomed. News of honoured guests, or even one honoured guest, changes everything. It is not that the castle lacks food. There is bread, there is meat, there are fish dishes prepared with due seriousness for the day, there are apples stewing, sauces thickening, pastries cooling in rows, and enough pottage left for the lower tables to survive disappointment. But hospitality in a noble household is not measured by sufficiency. It is measured by display. A lord must seem ready. A lady must seem untroubled. A table must appear as if it had always intended to receive exactly the people now approaching it, even if half the kitchen has just been told to make one roast divide more elegantly than nature meant it to. So the room swells at once with a particular kind of urgency, not panic. Exactly, though panic hovers nearby like a maid hoping to be useful. It is a busier, finer strain. More platters are brought out. Better cloths are shaken free of flour. The polished serving knives are unwrapped from their linen. Nan is sent for more herbs. Toma is sent for more rushlights and nearly walks into the spit because his mind is already upstairs among imagined noble cousins. Alice begins altering the apple dish without appearing to. That is one of her talent's ingredients simply drift closer together under her hand until a plain side dish wakes up wearing court manners. Master Ralph stands at the main board and begins dividing the evening in his head, which is a thing you can almost see happening. Roast here, fish there, tarts to the side table, sauce increased, not thinned, bread baskets fuller toward the centre, apples stretched with more spice and a better glaze. He asks 3 questions in quick succession: how many trenchers are laid for the upper board, whether there is another clean platter in the buttery, and if the smaller pies have held their shape after cooling. No one answers in full sentences because full sentences take time. You move to the pastry board and inspect the little pies again. They have cooled firm, their crimped edges still neat, the decorative leaves still visible, though one has shifted and now resembles a wilted cabbage more than any noble plant. You decide this is a private problem between yourself and God, and turn the tray so that leaf faces inward. Medieval presentation often depends on confidence and angle. At the far hearth, Joan is slicing the roast's accompaniments. Onions softened almost to sweetness, herbs chopped fine, a little garlic, though not too much because some nobles consider visible garlic proof of peasant enthusiasm. The kitchen understands these strange rules better than the diners do. A dish must taste rich, look ordered, and never admit how close it stands to mud, labour, or raw ingredients. Civilization at table is partly a matter of what is not mentioned. The tawny-eared dog senses the change instantly. He rises from his corner and begins pacing the walls of the kitchen. Not underfoot exactly, but close enough to remind everyone that if anything splendid happens to fall, he will receive it as destiny rather than theft. The turnspit dog, still at labour, keeps his slower orbit in the wheel and looks as though he has seen this sort of noble emergency before, which, to be fair, he probably has. Outside the kitchen the household adjusts too. You hear quicker footsteps in the passage, one maid hurrying upward with folded linen, another down toward the cellar for wine. Somewhere in the yard a groom calls for a brush, a door bangs above, then another. The entire castle seems to tighten its laces. Guests do not simply arrive at table, they draw half the household into orbit before ever taking their seats. No one can quite agree whether noble hospitality is a virtue or a theatrical condition, but the kitchen must serve it either way. Master Ralph decides the roast will need embellishment. Not because it is lacking. It turns beautifully now, the skin bronzed and glistening, the fat hissing down in fragrant drops to the pan below. But beauty at a high table must often be given a second beauty, as if one were not sufficient proof of refinement. So a glaze is begun, pan juices enriched, sharpened with a little wine, deepened with herbs, thickened just enough to cling and shine. Not gravy in the broad common sense, something finer, something to be painted on in layers until the meat reflects the candlelight later as if aware of its own importance. You baste it carefully while Joan prepares the board where it will eventually be carved. Breadcrumbs are ready for thickening. A cloth is laid beneath the platter. A garnish of parsley is chopped. Though you know well enough that half the noble table will leave herbs untouched at the edge, as if leaves were beneath their courage. Alice, meanwhile, has transformed the apples, where earlier they were simply stewed. Now they take a spoonful more honey, a dusting of cinnamon, and a little reduction of the cooking liquid until they shine like polished wood. No one ever praises plain apples, she says. Someone should, says Nan. Someone poor might. This is not cruelty, it is taxonomy. Toma returns with the rushlights and sets them near the wall. Then he is sent to fetch more trenchers from the bread room and asked whether the hall servants have begun laying the upper board. He says yes, with salt cellars and cups already set, and adds that the lady's cousin is said to travel with a chaplain who complains of draughts. Joan mutters that the chaplain may dine in the oven if warmth is his chief devotion. There are always such scraps of news around a guest. One cousin arrives hungry, another refuses onions, a knight drinks too quickly, a widow eats only fish, a visiting monk disapproves of spices yet somehow never misses the sweet course. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which guest brought which nuisance, but every kitchen remembers the species well enough. Nan begins arranging the fish platter for the more observant diners. The poached pike is laid over toasted bread, the almond sauce smoothed beside it rather than over it, so the flesh still shows pale and fine. Herbs scattered with more care than one would think possible in such a room. It looks almost serene. That is one of the marvels of kitchen work. Amid sweat, haste, smoke, burns, and muttered warnings, dishes emerge with the appearance of calm. The food lies to the eye on behalf of the house. Master Ralph calls for another loaf from the morning batch, and you choose the best-shaped one, the crust browned evenly, not too flour-pale on one side, not cracked at the heel. Bread for the upper table must look robust but not rustic, generous but not coarse. You wipe a dusting of ash from its underside with the hem of your apron and set it with the others in the better basket. It is absurd, perhaps. How much judgment can attach to a loaf? Yet in a world where harvest, lordship, and God are believed to stand in visible relation, bread becomes more than food, it becomes a message. At the centre board the little pies are plated, 3 to one side, 2 to another, a gap is adjusted, a leaf is straightened, one pie with a slightly darker edge is quietly moved farther back. Master Ralph inspects them, nods once, and says, "Good enough for a bishop," which is more than we've got. That is genuine praise. The room moves faster still now, but with a cleaner rhythm than the chaos of morning. Each person has a line of work, and all the lines are beginning to converge. This is the strange swelling before a feast proper begins, not the feast itself, but its gathering pressure. A hall above waits to be impressed. A household below arranges itself to make impressing seem effortless. More plates come in from warming, better cloths go out. The roasting meat nears readiness. A ladle drops. Someone catches it before it strikes the floor. Alice crosses herself over the apples without quite admitting she has done so. Some swear that food meant for honoured guests tastes better if never openly praised before leaving the kitchen, lest pride spoil it. Others say that is nonsense invented by cooks who fear disappointment. Even now, it is hard to tell. Yet no one here says the roast is perfect, or the glaze brilliant, or the fish elegant. They simply work harder. You feel the atmosphere gather in your own body too. The ache in your shoulders sharpens into alertness. Your hands move more carefully, though they are more tired. You notice every smear on a platter, every drip on a rim, every herb stem out of place. The kitchen's little kingdom is no longer merely feeding a household. It is mounting a performance in which no one claps for the people who built the stage. Then footsteps sound more quickly in the passage, and a hall servant appears at the doorway, cheeks flushed, hair smoothed in haste. They are coming down to table. There it is. The words strike the room like another bell. At once the kitchen tightens into its final preparatory motion. Cloths are snatched up, platters are aligned, the roast is drawn nearer, sauce is reheated, bread is lifted, hands are wiped, shoulders square. The long day, with all its hauling, chopping, washing, burning, counting, and muttering, turns toward this moment the instant before the first dish leaves the kitchen, and the household's honour goes out balanced on someone's wrists. And under the soot-dark rafters, with the heat still pressing from the hearth and the smell of glaze, spice, and roast flesh thick in the air, you feel the feast begin to gather around you like weather. The moment before the first platter leaves the kitchen feels like standing at the edge of a river just as the current quickens. Everything has been in motion all day, but now that motion gathers direction. Hands that have worked separately begin to move in sequence. Voices drop, sharpen, align. The kitchen draws one steady breath. Then the first dish goes. A hall servant steps forward, cloth folded over one arm, and receives the fish platter with a care that borders on reverence. Nan adjusts the herbs once more, though there is nothing left to improve. Master Ralph nods. The servant turns and disappears into the passage, carrying not merely fish and sauce but the visible proof that the household is attentive, observant, prepared. After that, everything begins to flow. You take up the tray of small pies and pass them, one by one, to another servant who arranges them with quick, practiced hands before carrying them onward. Joan lifts the onion dish, steam rising in a soft cloud around her face, and follows. Alice directs the apple tarts to be held back a moment longer so their glaze keeps its shine. Toma hovers with cloths, nearly colliding with a passing platter, and then recovering himself just in time to look as though he had meant to be exactly where he was all along. The passage between kitchen and hall becomes a narrow artery of motion. In one direction, dishes leave fish, pies, bread, sauces, onions. In the other, empty hands return, then soon enough empty platters, cups needing wiping, requests whispered with urgency but not panic. The rhythm builds, not chaotic, but layered, like several songs sung together by people who know their parts. You catch a brief glimpse into the hall when the door opens wide enough, candlelight catching on metal, the long table laid with cloth, figures settling into their places, the shimmer of fur and embroidered sleeves. The Lord sits at the centre, or near enough. The lady to one side, the unexpected cousin, perhaps, speaking already. Servants move along the edges, silent as shadows, placing dishes, pouring wine, withdrawing. It looks orderly. It looks effortless. It is neither. Back in the kitchen, the heat feels sharper now, as if aware it must perform as well. The roasting joint is ready, Master Ralph signals, and you step forward with the long fork to steady it while he checks the glaze one last time. The surface gleams, dark and golden, the scent rich enough to silence any argument for a moment. Now, he says, the spit is lifted, carefully, expertly, the weight shifting as the meat comes free. It is laid onto the waiting board, juices running, steam rising in a thick, fragrant wave. For a heartbeat, everything else fades. This is the centerpiece, the dish that must not fail. Master Ralph begins to carve. His knife moves with certainty, slicing cleanly through the outer layer, revealing the tender meat beneath. Portions are cut, arranged, turned so each piece looks deliberate, generous, worthy. You stand ready with a platter, shifting it as he works, catching each slice before it loses its place. Joan spoons the glaze over the arranged meat, not drowning it, but dressing it, making it shine. No one speaks. The only sounds are knife against board, the soft fall of meat onto the platter, the quiet hiss of sauce meeting heat. Even the torn-eared dog remains still, as though he understands that this moment belongs to a different order of attention. When the platter is full, Master Ralph steps back. You do not admire it. You do not praise it. You simply hold it steady as the hall servant steps forward and takes it from you. The weight leaves your arms, the dish leaves the kitchen, and with it, a part of the day. The flow continues, more dishes follow, bread baskets are replenished, wine is requested, then more wine. A souille is sent back for reheating, another for thickening, a complaint arrives too much salt. Not enough. It is hard to tell, because the message has travelled through 3 people and lost its shape along the way. Master Ralph adjusts the next batch anyway, because in a noble household, perception often matters more than certainty. Toma is sent running twice, then 3 times, each journey faster than the last. Nan wipes platters as they return, removing traces of what has already been consumed so that they may be filled again if needed. Joan keeps the hearth steady, feeding it just enough to maintain heat without flaring too high. Alice watches everything, intervening only when something begins to slip. At one point, a platter nearly tilts in the passage. A servant stumbles, catches himself, and for a moment the entire kitchen seems to lean with him, as though willing the dish to remain upright. It does. He disappears into the hall, dignity intact. No one comments. There is no space for relief yet. The noise from the hall grows faintly louder now, voices rising and falling. Laughter, the clink of cups. Music begins somewhere, a lute perhaps, or a small harp, its notes threading through the stone like something softer than the day deserves. You hear it only in fragments, between the calls and movements of the kitchen, but it is enough to remind you that above this heat and labour, the meal is unfolding as it should, or at least as it appears to. Back in the kitchen, the work begins to shift again. The main dishes have gone. What remains are the smaller tasks, the adjustments, the steady support that keeps the feast from faltering. Apples are plated, cheese is cut, bread is refreshed, a sauce is saved from catching just in time. Another is deemed beyond rescue and quietly replaced. No one can quite agree whether the most dangerous moment in a meal is the beginning, when everything must go out at once, or the middle, when attention begins to drift and mistakes creep in unnoticed. Here, you feel the truth of the latter. The urgency has softened, but the risk has not. You wipe your hands on your apron and take a brief breath near the edge of the room. The heat is still there, but it no longer presses quite so hard. Your shoulders ache. Your fingers carry the memory of knife and ladle. Your clothes smell of smoke and spice and something deeper that belongs only to kitchens at the end of long days. The torn-eared dog settles beside the wall again, as if he knows the best chances have passed. The turnspit dog, released from his wheel, lies stretched out, sides rising and falling slowly. Even the fire seems to burn with a steadier, less demanding rhythm. The feast continues above, but here, below, the great surge of it has already moved through you, and as the last of the main dishes leave the kitchen and the flow of platters begins to slow, you realize that the day has reached its quiet turning point, not an end. Not yet, but the place where effort begins to give way, little by little, to aftermath. When the great movement of dishes begins to slow, the kitchen does not fall silent, it simply changes its burdens. The urgency of sending food outward gives way to the steady return of what has already been used. Platters come back smeared with sauce, crumbs clinging stubbornly to their edges. Cups arrive half emptied, some drained with enthusiasm, others barely touched as if the wine had offended someone's memory. Bones, stripped clean, or nearly so, lie in shallow heaps that tell their own quiet story of appetite. This is the hour after splendor. Joan takes the first stack of platters and lowers them into the washing basin, where hot water clouds almost immediately with grease and the ghost of the meal just past. You join her, sleeves rolled again, hands returning to the endless rhythm of scrubbing. Cloth, water, scrape, rinse. The work is simpler now in its motions, but no less necessary. A noble feast may gleam in the hall, but it dissolves in the kitchen, reduced to what can be cleaned, saved, or thrown to creatures who wait patiently for their share. The torn-eared dog has returned to full attention. He watches each discarded bone as though it were a relic, and perhaps to him it is. Joan tosses one his way, and he takes it with grave efficiency, retreating to a corner where he can work at it without interference. The turnspit dog, less energetic now, receives his portion with the slow dignity of someone who has earned it honestly. Between them, the remains of the high table find a second life. You cannot help but notice how different this side of the meal feels. Above, there is laughter, conversation, perhaps little performance gestures, compliments, the careful display of ease. Below, there is the truth of it. Food reduced to scraps, plates reduced to objects, labour continuing without audience. It is not unpleasant, exactly. There is a kind of honesty here that the hall does not require. Nan stands at the side table, sorting what can be saved. Bread ends go into one basket, usable scraps into another. Bones for broth are set aside, because even after a feast, nothing that can give flavour to tomorrow's pot is wasted. Alice supervises this with the calm certainty of someone who has seen too many winters to allow carelessness now. Not that one, she says, pointing to a piece of meat too gnawed to be respectable. Dogs. The torn-eared dog looks up at once, as if acknowledging his role in the order of things. Toma carries a tray of cups back from the hall, his steps slower now, the earlier urgency replaced by a kind of weary pride. He has survived the rush. He sets the cups down carefully, then leans for a moment against the wall, breathing out as though releasing the whole day from his lungs. Well, Joan asks. They are eating, he says. Good. That is generally the plan. They laughed, he adds, as if this matters. Alice nods, then we did not shame them. That is the closest thing to praise the kitchen allows itself. You continue scrubbing, feeling the warmth of the water ease the stiffness in your fingers. The rhythm becomes almost soothing after the sharpness of the earlier hours. Outside, the light has begun to fade, though you see it only as a dimming at the edges of the shutter. The day is slipping toward evening, toward that long medieval night that arrives not with sudden darkness, but with a gradual surrender of colour. From the hall, the music continues, softer now. Voices rise and fall. At one point there is a burst of laughter loud enough to reach even here, and for a moment the kitchen pauses not in work, but in awareness. The sound is distant, but it confirms something important: the meal has succeeded. No one says it aloud. Instead, the work goes on. The basins are emptied and refilled. Cloths are wrung out and replaced. The last of the platters return, lighter now, carrying only the faintest traces of what they once held. A servant brings back a dish with barely touched fish, and Nan sets it aside with a small frown. Waste, even at the high table, is noted. Not judged openly, perhaps, but remembered. Some swear that food left uneaten carries ill fortune, Joan says quietly. Some swear many things, Alice replies, but it will carry tomorrow's broth, which is fortune enough. No one can quite agree whether such beliefs arise from reverence or necessity. Perhaps both. In a world where abundance is never guaranteed, even the remnants of a feast must be treated with care. As the last dishes are cleaned, the kitchen begins to settle. The fires are still burning but lower now. The great pots have been emptied or covered. The air, though still warm, feels less oppressive. It is the difference between effort and aftermath, between doing and having done. You take a moment to sit on the edge of the bench, your body reminding you of every task it has performed since before dawn. Your shoulders ache in a deep, steady way. Your hands carry the memory of heat, of knife, of water. Your clothes smell entirely of the kitchen now: smoke, spice, onion, and something harder to name, something like the day itself, across from you. Joan stretches her arms and lets out a low breath. Nan leans against the table, eyes half closed. Toma has found a corner where he can sit without being immediately summoned again. Even Alice allows herself a moment, though her hands never quite stop moving. This is the quiet fellowship of the kitchen at day's end. No ceremony, no speeches, just the shared understanding of work completed, of effort given, of a household fed and a feast carried through without disaster. The tawny-eared dog finishes his bone and settles near the hearth, curling into himself as if folding the day away. The turnspit dog lies stretched out, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of breath. The fire casts a softer light now, its earlier ferocity reduced to something almost gentle. From above, the sounds of the feast begin to fade. Chairs scrape, voices lower. The music pauses, then stops. One by one, the signals of the evening's end drift down through the stone. The kitchen does not celebrate. It simply continues. There are still small tasks to finish, still things to put in order, still the quiet work that follows every great effort. But the weight of the day has shifted. What remains is lighter, slower, closer to rest. And as you sit there, in the dimming warmth beneath the soot-dark rafters, you feel it too, that slow turning from labour towards something softer, something quieter. Not sleep yet, but the promise of it. The kitchen does not empty all at once, it thins. Where earlier there were many hands moving in overlapping purpose, now there are fewer, each one finishing what remains with a quieter kind of care. The great urgency has passed, but order must still be restored. A noble household may forgive a delayed dish more easily than a disordered kitchen come morning. So the evening settles into its last labours. You rise from the bench and return to the hearth, where the fires, though lower, still hold enough life to require tending. The larger logs have burned down to red glowing cores. Ash gathers thickly beneath them. With the iron rod, you draw the embers together, not to extinguish them, but to bank them, covering them just enough that they will survive the night, ready to be coaxed awake again before dawn. Fire, like bread, remembers. It carries the day forward if treated properly. Some swear that letting a hearth fire die completely invites misfortune into a house. Others say it merely invites a cold morning and more work. Either way, no one here lets the fire go out willingly. Joan joins you with a bucket of water, not to douse the flames but to set beside them, ready for morning use. Leave it close, she says. It saves steps when the dark still thinks it owns the place. You nod, adjusting the bucket so it will not tip. Small arrangements like this shape the next day long before it begins. At the washing table, Nan and Thomas finish the last of the cloths, hanging them near the warmer stone so they dry enough to be useful again. The basins are emptied for the final time, their cloudy water carried out into the yard where it will vanish into earth that has seen worse. The boards are wiped down, knives are cleaned and set in their places. The mortar is scraped and rinsed, its work for the day complete. Alice moves through the room like a quiet reckoning, checking what others might overlook. The bread is turned again beneath its cloth so no damp settles unnoticed. The herb bundles are adjusted. The remaining apples are covered. The onions from the rear bin, those with skins already loosening, are brought forward, just as the steward insisted, though she does it in her own time, as if to prove the act belongs to her more than to him. Things go bad when you forget them, she says, almost to herself. It could be about onions. It could be about anything. The tawny-eared dog watches all of this with half-lidded eyes. His earlier alertness softened into something like contentment. He has eaten. He has remained. In his world, these are the chief successes. The turnspit dog, older and more deeply tired, has not moved from his place near the hearth. His breathing is slow, steady, a quiet rhythm that seems to match the dimming fire. You step outside for a moment, carrying a small bucket of scraps that will not be saved. The yard has changed completely from the morning, where there was once frost and pale light. Now there is dusk settling into the corners. The sky holds the last faint colour of day, fading behind the towers. A chill has returned, not sharp but certain. Somewhere beyond the walls, a bell sounds again, one of the evening offices, marking time for those who still keep it closely. The air smells cleaner here, though touched by smoke from the kitchen vent above. You breathe it in, letting it cool your face, your hands, the back of your neck where heat has lived all day. For a moment, the world feels wider again, no longer reduced to the size of a room and its demands. From the stables comes the low murmur of horses settling. From the gate, the quieter voices of guards changing watch. Somewhere in the distance, perhaps along the road, a cartwheel creaks, late to arrive or early to depart. The life of the household does not end with the feast, it only shifts into its night shape. You empty the bucket, rinse it once, and carry it back inside. The kitchen is dimmer now. A few candles burn low along the walls, their light softer than the fierce glow of the hearth earlier. Shadows gather in the corners, but they no longer feel heavy. They feel like rest. Joan has taken a seat near the table, rubbing her hands slowly as if remembering each task they performed. Nan sits beside her, head tilted slightly back, eyes closed but not asleep. Toma leans against the wall, his earlier restlessness gone, replaced by the deep stillness of someone who has spent everything he had. Master Ralph stands near the main board, looking over the room one last time. There is less sharpness in him now. The work has been done. The meal has gone well enough. The household remains unshamed. In a world where so much can falter, that is no small victory. Morning comes early, he says, not unkindly. It is both a warning and a reassurance. Alice nods. It always does. No one argues. You take your place near the hearth, close enough to feel its remaining warmth but not so close that it demands anything from you. The fire, banked and quiet, glows softly beneath its covering of ash. It looks almost like it did when you first found it, though you know how much has passed between then and now. The same room, a different hour. No one can quite agree whether a day in such a place passes quickly or slowly. It is both. Each task stretches, fills its moment completely. Yet when the last is done, the whole seems to fold in on itself, leaving only the memory of movement, heat, and the steady passage of time marked by bells and breath. You notice the half-burned candle from the morning still on the shelf, now reduced further, its wax pooled unevenly around the wick. It has watched the entire day without comment, like the rafters, like the stones, like the fire itself. The kitchen settles, not into silence, but into something close to it, a shared quiet, a space where no one needs to speak because everything that needed saying has already been done through work. Outside, the last light fades. Inside, the candles hold their small ground against the dark, and in the gentle warmth of the hearth, with the smell of smoke softened into something almost comforting, the long day begins to release its hold on you, little by little, as the castle above and around you prepares to sleep. The last of the candles burn lower, their light no longer reaching the corners but gathering close, as if even flame prefers to rest when the day has been long enough. The kitchen, which once seemed too full of motion to ever be still, has softened into something quieter, gentler, almost like a room remembering itself after being lived into completely. You remain near the hearth, watching the banked embers breathe beneath their pale cover of ash. Every now and then, a small glow deepens and fades again, like a slow heartbeat. The warmth is no longer sharp. It does not demand anything from you. It simply stays, steady and patient, the way it has stayed through countless nights before this one. Around you, the others settle in their own ways. Joan has stretched out on a bench, one arm over her eyes, her breathing already slow. Nan sits with her back against the wall, chin lowered, drifting somewhere between waking and sleep. Thomas, who fought the day at every step, has given in completely, curled near the warmer stones with the same blanket he wore at dawn. Even Alice, tireless as she is, has allowed herself to sit fully at last, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze soft and distant. Master Ralph has gone, or perhaps he lingers somewhere beyond the doorway, checking one last thing, thinking one last thought about tomorrow's bread or the steward's ledger. In a place like this, the work never truly leaves the mind. It only loosens its grip enough for sleep to take hold. The torn-eared dog lies near the hearth, his body curved into itself, one ear twitching now and then as if chasing something in dreams. The turnspit dog does not move at all, save for the slow rise and fall of his sides, the deep, earned rest of a creature who has walked his circle and found it finished for the day. The kitchen smells different now. Not of fresh cooking, not of sharp smoke or hot fat, but of what remains after. Warm stone, faint ash, a trace of herbs, the quiet sweetness of bread that has cooled. It is a softer scent, one that does not cling so fiercely, one that seems to belong more to memory than to the present moment. Outside, the castle is settled as well. The bells have fallen silent. The yard lies still beneath the night. Somewhere far off, perhaps beyond the walls, a dog barks once and then no more. The wind moves lightly along the stone, too gentle to be called cold, too present to be ignored entirely. It carries with it the distant scent of earth and water, of fields that will wait for morning without complaint. You shift slightly, letting the warmth of the hearth reach your hands. They still carry the memory of the day, the weight of buckets, the roughness of wood, the heat of iron, the steady rhythm of knife and spoon. Your shoulders ache, but in a way that feels earned rather than sharp. Your breath slows. The day, with all its noise and motion, begins to feel distant. It is strange how quickly it passes once it is done. The early dark, the cold yard, the first coaxing of flame from ash, the market's clamour, the kitchen's rising heat, the rush of preparation, the careful work of feeding so many each moment seemed full when it came. Each one demanded its place, its effort, its attention, and now they lie behind you, quiet and folded, like cloth set aside after use. No one can quite agree whether such days are hard or simply complete. Perhaps they are both. You glance once more at the hearth, at the steady glow beneath the ash, and think of how it will be in the morning. The embers will still be there, waiting. The room will wake again. The cold will return. The work will begin again in its same familiar rhythm, its same quiet demands. But not yet, for now there is only this: the dim light, the gentle warmth, the slow, even breathing of those around you, the sense of a place at rest, held together not by urgency or effort, but by the simple fact of having endured another day. You let your eyes close. The sounds of the kitchen fade further, blending into something softer, something distant. The faint crackle of the hearth becomes a lullaby. The smell of ash and bread becomes something like comfort. The weight of the day settles, not as burden, but as something that can finally be set down. And in that quiet, beneath the soot-dark rafters, within the stone walls of a world that moves slowly and sleeps deeply, you drift with it. Not into silence, but into rest.